It is now time for another session of our Got-IT Talks. With me today is Carolien Smits of the Pharos Research Institute in the Netherlands. Today, the topic is, as some of you may have seen already, data visualization. And while we'll be doing a lot of talking about data visualization, it's of course within the context of digital development in general. Um, so data visualization, I mean, that's a fairly specific topic, Caroline. How did you come about to work with digital development in this particular field?
Um, well, first of all, thank you, Lars, for inviting me and having this opportunity to have this talk, and because I probably can use it as a sort of, at least as a reflection of what I'm really doing, or should be doing, maybe. How did this happen? Um, I have a decent interest in technology, but not overly so. I mean, it's not my sort of my territory. I'm a psychologist, gerontologist, social gerontologist. Um, so I've always done research on aging, older people, um, care, yeah, functioning, and over time, um, I've been drawn to more applied research and development, um, practice-based, um, sort of to facilitate all the people, but also to facilitate professionals and professional education. Um, and of course, over time, then this technology has been sort of promised. I mean, has been, I mean, it's been like technology is going to save the world, at least the aging world. And of course, as deontology, there's no escape. So I've done research, but mostly on sort of the sort of actual use or the perception or the experience of users in applied technology, and mostly a lot of it is sort of everyday technology. So it's things like in terms of clients and patients. Maybe 10 years ago, I was involved with developing an online web-based decision aid for people with dementia. And I've been involved with research on pet robots, these cute seals and all that. Not so much in the technology as in so what happens if you really use it, and how is it experienced, and do professionals actually, how do these care professionals actually use it? Are they,
But as
yeah.
you also point to, 10 years ago, it was definitely a different kind of technology that you were looking at. So would you describe it as a sort of looking into a constantly emerging and shifting sands, or what's the constant you think? Are we slowly improving, allowing you to apply your knowledge or fields to different types, or are we making the same mistakes just using new types of technologies?
um, well, it's tempting to
Both.
say yes. In a sense, yes. We are making the same mistakes. I believe it's still very much um, what's the word? It's sort of technology driven, and because we can do all these new smart things, people think that we should all use them, and
Hmm.
that we should develop things, then and people are going to use them, and everybody's going to be happy. Not so. Um, but at the same time, I think there's a growing awareness that um, people that technology should be useful. That you can't just throw something in the market. Well, I mean, Apple may be able to do so, but not your everyday application or tool. So
Hmm.
there is more. I think there's more awareness. Yeah.
So we'll be talking a bit more about or diving deeper into data visualization, but um, with the technologies that we have in, I don't know, 2020, 2021, emerging for 2022, what's the key elements? Of course, data visualization. I imagine that's, of course, especially within apps and websites and so on. But other key areas that you're currently sort of very keen on exploring?
Well, personally, I'm very interested in everything that sort of facilitates citizen science, sort of, and I think that that technology may be helpful in there. If I mean, there's a lot of conditions to before that really happens, but I think there's great potential, yeah, in there.
Hmm. Or rather, how maybe, it's a thing that I'm keen on diving into. How would you describe that this has then been affected by, well, Corona? Has this made your life easier or more difficult? As a researcher, is this something? Is this paradise? Suddenly, all kinds of tech, telemedicine solutions being bombarded upon unwilling citizens for you to study, or has this actually been a challenge in suddenly needing to find new ways of studying stuff?
Yeah.
Is it good and bad, or
Well, it is complicated, as you can imagine, and I think in
good or
in
don't?
many ways there has been this sort of this technology leap, of people being forced to well forced to do online video meetings, for instance, or seminars or talks, um, and that it has been helpful for certainly for professionals, certainly for um, probably a large group of clients and patients too. At the same time, I'm worried that this leap has not been successfully made by people um, who have been using very, yeah, sort of the illiterate people with limited literacy, limited health literacy, um, people with a socio economic status that is vulnerable. Um, and so, in a sense, of course, Pharos is expertise center on health disparities. So we're very keen on these the gap that's there, and actually the gap has been widening in the Netherlands over the last 10 years. So I'm also afraid that this technology leap that some people have been taking, um, and the others not. So in the end, the people uh, in in these vulnerable positions are in a lower in a poor disposition.
Hmm. Is it both a problem that some are left behind, or simply that there's a disparity? I mean, um, if we were talking about people crossing a bridge, it would be nice for us as many as possible to cross that bridge, but you would still be thankful that at least some made it across. But in this case, is it a challenge also that we now have people stuck on both sides of the river
Um,
to stay in the metaphorical space?
yes, that's a nice metaphor. I think that's the problem, and I think the mutual understanding uh, may be increasing too.
Hmm.
Misunderstanding, or
Hmm.
so that's um, and that then it becomes a societal, a social issue. You know,
Hmm.
sort of the polarization that has been, you know, in some sense in the Netherlands at least has been grown in during COVID-19. Um, so sort of, and it's yeah, it's also a very complex, sort of differentiated, I mean, I was going to say have the haves and the have-nots, but it's not as
Mm,
simple as that.
mm. No, it's not a demographical or matter of resources per se, not financial resources anyway.
No,
Um,
it's I think
okay.
it's a lot to do with trust, and it's sort of trust in authorities, trust in also again in technology.
Yeah, yeah, we're
Um,
certainly seeing a lot of trust-based issues that for some has been a complete surprise. Although we don't have the same challenges with, for instance, vaccinations and distrust of that in Europe as we do in the US, for instance, that we have a lot of very advanced discussions with trust at the center these days related to different types of biotech or tech in general. But actually, what we're also, and maybe that's, I think we'll come back to the issue about trust because we'll be talking a little bit more about data visualization. And of course, I suppose without saying everything for you, I hope not. The idea about how to establish a good interaction, a user interface, understanding, a joint understanding of facts. But allow me to, I mean, your philosophy or approach to data visualization is simply a part of the citizen science, or is this a design sort of world of its own, or
well, to me,
how?
it's sort of
Yeah.
yeah, to me, it's sort of symbolic of it. So, in a sense, sort of data visualization seems like a very simple, limited exercise, and yet at the same time, if you dive into it, there's a whole world that several worlds that actually meet in there, and that's I mean that's fascinating. And to me, I'm not an expert in data visualization. I should stress that. I mean, colleagues in our Got-IT project are definitely more expertise in that. But as a sort of a psychologist and deontologist, I'm interested in um, what does in the in the perceptions and actually the meaning that people attach to these visualizations, um, and that's fascinating because it shows that um, there's so much people assume so much. So do I. I mean, I mean, I'm familiar with the visualizations and health apps. So you assume that they are simple because they are sort of more or less simple to me, then they are more or less simple to everybody,
Hmm.
and that's sort of a quality. If it's simple to me, then it must be a good visualization, must be a good app. But if you um, so if you test it, if you do co-creation with the actual users that we are targeting, and we've been doing that in the Netherlands, and we've been doing that in Austria, then it's really telling that how people um, they have a different perception, and it's not because they're dumb or stupid or because that's the interesting thing. They see things and like they say, well, this contrast, I mean, it's confusing, or this color, it puts me on the wrong foot, we would say in Dutch. So um, and I think that's fascinating because then it makes me look again and I think, oh, right, well, no, this visualization was not really very clever and simple.
Hmm.
So
I
there's a lot of
was
things that come together in this visualization. And at the same time, the nice thing, of course, is that it's the epitome of show, don't tell. So in potential, it can be very democratic because also people with limited literacy, they can actually look at it and get the message. Well, that's the idea. Um, so it has a lot of potential, but yeah, many pitfalls all the same.
Well, I was amazed initially when the first iPhone came out because uh, that would actually put my mother on a path of using digital devices. And it did, but she had to go through the slide to unlock process first, and she didn't understand. She had to put her finger and then slide the slider to unlock. Um, which was a fairly simple and almost universally understood process of interpreting an instruction. But and even though I find it funny, I would not suggest that my mother was stupid, but definitely understood technology in a different way. Um, well, she still does, I suppose, but that's not the point. Um, but is this a sort of is this mostly then something that you think is attributed to the digital world? Is this the same mistake that we repeat from our data visualization in print, or are we? I mean, are we assuming maybe that because people understand data in a certain way in an offline capacity, they should understand it in the same way in a digital, or are we talking about different errors we're doing? What's your observation from?
Mhm.
Um, you said before that people assume a lot, and in this case, maybe they assume that these digital devices should be easier to understand because they are built by clever people. Um, are they falling victims to their own assumptions?
Yes, I think so. I think in the end, it's a sort of a human limitation or challenge to be able to really empathize, to be in somebody else's shoe, and that's to do with the way, yeah. And that's interesting as a gerontologist. You know, people have grown up in a, I mean, we're all basically, we have the same wiring at birth, but people grow up in a different, in a geographical context, but they grow up in a historical context, and that also in a social context, and it all affects sort of the wiring. Um, and it's telling, yeah, I think your mother's example is a very good one, and I had a similar one with my mother-in-law when I mean that's 15 years ago. I gave her an iPad because I thought that that would sort of open up the world a bit, and I thought, well, an iPad, I mean, can't be any simpler than that. And only when watching her use it, you can actually see, well, it's not simple, and I mean, it takes a lot of things for granted. It takes our sort of way of sort of perception, and um, it takes it for granted. I mean, thinking in terms of menus, for instance. I mean,
Hmm.
the sliding movement is a good example. Also, thinking in terms of menus. Um, that's something really new.
Hmm.
That you really, and thinking in terms of on off. I mean, that's what technology is basically about. It's zero or one,
Hmm.
and it's not how we've been uh, sort of sort of biologically wired. But yet we can learn it because lots of people have learned it in a very short time. But you can't take it for granted. And the same with people um, who are not literate at all. I mean, their way of thinking is very different from ours. So they don't think in they don't perceive lines that make up a figure or a graph. They
Hmm.
just don't see it as such. So
Hmm.
a lot to do is to do with the sort of also very basic psychological psychological perception functioning.
What would you then describe as some of the more frequent types of errors? Is that, for instance, the element that you point to before, that people that may not be well literate, that they look at numbers or symbols in a different way than people that are literate, and yet when they then have to both understand an image, they see different things, very different things maybe. Is that one of the, is if you should list a number of errors that you've come across, which
Yeah,
you
it's
find
one of the
more?
things that make
No.
things difficult, and at Pharos, it's one of the reasons why if we develop sort of information or communication for people with low literacy or really illiterate people, then we don't use sort of animations. We use real people because
Hmm.
people have difficulty with really distinguishing line figures, or they get diverted, um, and they don't see what the actual core of the message of the drawing is. For instance, that's more difficult. Can be more difficult for them. So
Interesting.
yeah, whereas yeah, go on.
Yeah. Well, no, it's but very, I I've noticed that there's definitely an increased focus on using animations these days for dissemination purposes of various kinds. Um, it's easy to build because you don't need the same resources to hire actors. It's easier to edit and so on and so on. Um, but that um, those benefits might come at the cost of actually delivering the message.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mm.
And I'm not saying that it cannot be used, but it can be very critical. You really have to test it with people themselves if it works or not. Yeah.
Do you think then that this element, either by the animations or the other types of visualization, that it's more important in the digital world? I mean, maybe because we have fewer other sort of interfaces to work with, or is it just as important in yet because we are using it in a digital arena, we can suddenly see that the system now breaks down. Whereas if it was in a, I don't know, at a conference or whatever, people would just nudge the person next to him or her and say, "I don't understand this. Could you please explain?" And we're in a digital world. We don't have anyone to help us. Well, not all the time, anyway. Um, so is this is are we again? I think I'm asking the same question, but multiple times. It's very fascinating for me, I suppose, whether this is the same problem that we see in an offline setting, um, but that it's just more important, or how? I mean, when you've conducted your interviews with your different users, what do you see in that sense? Um,
Um, I think if you use uh, technology, you may not always be able to find help if you miss out on something. And as long as you're, I mean, that's sort of one of the lessons that we learned from research in technology in COVID. As long as you're in a social environment that people can help you, um, then it's all right. But um, certainly in COVID times, that was exactly the problem. So people were motivated to use more technology, but if you get stuck, then there was nobody. There maybe not have been anybody around to help you out, and and that's it. It shows that for technology uptake, it takes not just clever and usable technology, but it also means a sort of a hybrid application where there's sort of a real life help feasible at least, and the technology itself. So um, yeah, certainly in people who are sort of the starters.
Hmm. Well, I said these, well, more or less 18 months or so, has seen a lot of people using technology in ways that they haven't before, and we're maybe on the verge to finally figuring out how to unmute ourselves. But certainly a lot of people of all ages and groups that has been using they've been using technology in new ways, not just to talk to each other. Um, as a researcher, I suppose that you have also been busy studying a lot of those elements. What would you say from that extra research that you've found, especially during Corona?
In what sense? Sorry.
Either in the sense that more isolated people, I'm grasping a little bit at straws, but guessing maybe that more isolated people needed different things that we didn't expect, or that if you suddenly had a much higher intensity of digital meetings, you needed something else to either to network or to alleviate other interactions, data transfer since you didn't have the meeting at the coffee maker, or I mean, I various elements, things that either surprised you, aha moments during Corona, related to your research, that is.
Yeah, yeah. But some things um, show the sort of the universal problem of communication technology is and of course the wonder also is sort of the amount of information, um, and that is, I mean, it's so potentially so democratizing that everybody has access to almost all the information in the world due to technology. But um, um, it's also not um, to be easily grasped at the same time, and that also, I mean, that the COVID crisis really showed that you know um, everybody had problems sort of grasping and selecting the right information, selecting the right sources, selecting the right moments, selecting to listen to or to watch things, um, and and for some people it was just too much. They were not sure which they listened to all these sources and they listened to all the information, and
Hmm.
so it becomes so the information overload was really stressful for a lot of people. I was interviewing family caregivers of older migrants with dementia, and I mean, in the first COVID wave, I mean, there was sort of a lot of sort of almost or real burnout in these caregivers because that was so stressful. The information flow was stressful, and they, of course, taking care of a person with dementia is very stressful, and in COVID times, it was definitely more important. So stressors were sort of really increasing for particular groups. Um, so, what was your question?
Key
So,
learnings from key learnings
yes,
from Corona.
yeah. So I mean, um, these migrant caregivers, they had access because they had smartphone. They were, and but it was just too difficult to make sense of it. So making sense of information
Hmm.
and making sense of technology is the challenge. Um,
So, if you were to write the manual for well, either authorities or other people for the next pandemic, because or epidemic, these things have a tendency to happen from time to time. Um, Selecting both data, selecting information a bit more carefully, um, or would that then lead? I mean, are there tips or tricks that you would say that you would advise people in, I suppose in this case, in authority to use when considering selecting either data or information to share?
Hmm. I think that's an important, and also selection, but also again, and that's similar to sort of our visualization, data visualization, um, making it understandable to the groups that you really want to understand them. Um, but not just that, I think you have to really ask these people what sort of information they are actually using. For instance, again, in these all the migrants and their children, um, the authorities never, or maybe very in a very late stage, realize that they are also watching Turkish or Moroccan television, or that they have personal networks in Germany or Denmark or you name it, and um, there's this community that exchanges information, um, and some may be sort of medically correct, others may be incorrect, but it's you can't take for granted that we as authority, our government, and all the sort of the official expertise centers, we develop these nice communication tools and we send it to all these people, and we think we do it really nicely, and we sort of disregard that we are just one of the sources that people actually use. Um, So we're assuming that we're sort of at the center of their world, and we're not.
Hmm.
Uh, so
Well, I mean, in any relationship, that can be a sad thing to realize that you're not the center of the world. But what would then be some of be more humility, perhaps? What's the antidote in this case?
yes, well, on the
I'm
one
fairly
hand, I
sure it's
think,
not to buy flowers.
yeah, no,
That
yeah,
wouldn't
we
work.
we have
Yeah.
a lot of them in the Netherlands, but yeah.
Oh yes, yes, of
Um,
course.
I think on the one hand, it's things like co-creation and really being in continuous touch with how what people want and what their preferences are and what their habits are, and so yeah, just avoid this sort of bubble in this sense, sort of avoid remaining in your own bubble, and really doing things together, and sort of at with regard to what I was just describing, maybe we should try and um, connect with Turkish television, and see what you can come up with, to have a more sort of balanced message in your broadcasting when it comes to COVID. I mean, that may be a challenge, but I mean, everything is challenging
Hmm.
in pandemic. Yeah.
So, of course, one of the keys to a good relationship between the state and the citizens is that the state actually listens um, with a bit of humility as well. But I mean, with the same example that you use in terms of or a recommendation of talking to TV stations or other sources to connect. Um, a lot of what we're doing when we talk about digital development and health solutions are driven also by big IT, by developers in other countries or so on. Um, would it is it actually sort of is it possible to stem that tide with a good approach by using co-creation, by prioritizing good digital health literacy in your population, or are you fighting a losing battle?
Um, I don't think we're fighting a losing battle, and I think big tech is probably very good at um, yeah at developing things that the majority of people can use if they have the money for it.
Hmm.
Um, because that's I mean that's that's their source of profit to so and I think I'm not sure, but I assume that they have far more research potential, sort of expertise and human power to develop things that really work with a large group of people. So yeah, they're clever. Um,
But would it then, I mean, going back to the metaphor that we used earlier, if big tech is helping most of the people to cross the river, should we, as non-big tech, focus on the few that didn't make it across, so that we actually solve the rest of the problem, and then just be thankful that someone has at least helped most of them to get the message?
yes, I think we should focus on the people that are sort of left behind, but that's not doing them that's not doing giving them the right credit. But at the same time, and getting back to the visualizations, if you develop visualizations that work for these people, then they are the right visualization because then nobody can object to visualization that are easy to understand. So it's not as if in this case we're doing just these people a pleasure. I mean, it's for everybody. It's handier if there's not too much information on the screen. If your eye is drawn exactly to the right spot on a graph, or um,
Hmm.
if the coloring, the contrast is good,
So
etc.
for data visualization, you can't use the Pareto principle of only finding a solution for 80% of the users. You should instead perhaps actually find the good old common ground that would allow 100% of the users to well understand the message instead,
Yeah,
right?
I think you should. Yeah, I think that should be your aim. Yeah,
Is it
and
is
and
it is it always possible, you think? I mean,
um,
I'm not questioning your I'm not questioning your logic here, but is it really possible to find that common ground? Are we as humans that well common? I mean,
sort of
meaning as in alike. Is it possible to always find the simple solution that would be universally understood? It's okay
that's
to
a
say
big
no.
question. Yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
yeah. I think if you're uh, as I was as an example, if you're really illiterate in then it becomes really difficult um, to find to find sort of a similar um, visualizations in this case that are understandable as for you and me.
Hmm. Yeah. So, but at least still to have the ideal of finding the almost 100% solution. Um, do you think maybe then that that solution would often also be a question perhaps of simplicity or aesthetics? Is it when you talk about visualization, is it often the process of removing the unnecessary so that you um, are left with the bare essentials? Or is it sometimes also recognizing that there's certain, perhaps minute but very complex elements that you need to build in to add the detail that would allow everyone to be there? What is it mostly a matter of simply finding the simple, or is it more advanced than that?
It's not. It's well, at least it's not things. It's not like just leaving things out.
Hmm.
It's a very complex. Well, it's many factorial. So it's to do with color itself. It's to do with contrast in color. It's to do with the size of figures. It's the amount of figures. Um, yeah, and it's also sort of very, and I'm not a sort of a perceptional. I mean, that's a different discipline within psychology. I mean, really the discipline of perception psychology. So I'm not, but I know things like where does your where's your eye drawn to at first and then next, and so what you can do with visual tracking of the eyeball. So there's a lot of things that you have to take account in. And I was in a session last week, and I realized because one of the Got It current visualization involves sort of simple graphs, and I was having this testing um, with these people with limited literacy, and at some point I thought, well, this is not going to work. Whatever graph you make up,
Hmm.
it's not going to work. It's and even if they think they have the right meaning, um, then if you talk about it, if you discuss it with them, then you realize, well, this is not. I mean, it's not right or wrong, but at least it's not what was meant to be understood.
Hmm.
So yeah, it has a lot of impact. Yeah.
Is that then, I mean, I asked earlier about the link between the digital world and the offline world. Is there some learnings here that you can feed back into other media also? Um,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. And vice versa. But I assume that designers also, IT designers also are familiar with principles such as the signposting within, for instance, in a large hospital. What's the right? What are the sort of the laws that should be obeyed to make them understandable for everybody.
Mm,
Um, and also, I was reminded of um, in dementia there are you get with aging there are different the changes appear in, of course in brain functioning, but also in sort of the perceptual area, and you have to take that into account also if people have dementia, then also their perception changes. For instance, things like if they walk on the floor, then and if we walk across the floor and we see some a sort of a rather abrupt line with a very different color, they were not afraid to step onto it.
Mm.
Whereas people with dementia, they may see this as an abyss, so they are afraid of stepping and falling into this ravine. So that's something that happens in the perceptual area. So there are in designing tools, but also designing residential areas for people with dementia. There are laws that can be sort of familiar for visualization of these sort of that underlying principles. I'm not sure, are there any designers watching that they could affirm that sort of thing. So
Yeah.
that's mutually enriching, I think.
Mm. But would you then say, having worked with well, senior citizens for a long time, that designers that are involved in various public design, that they are they good at obeying those laws? I mean, are you often finding, wow, that's a good design, or would you rather say that you're finding, God damn it, they haven't they learned anything? But are we as a culture? Would you find that we are often good at actually going that extra step to help our fellow human beings in navigating their world, or are we are we actually good at blindsiding people?
Yeah, I think we're not good enough. But at the same time, um, but that may be because in my bubble there I see gerontologists or designers that are really in co-creation, working in co-creation with older people. Um, um, but at the same time, it remains it remains difficult to really yeah to really cross that bridge. Yeah.
Hmm. Is that maybe, I mean, there's been a lot of debate about in the under the headline of leaving no one behind. That's been especially focused on people with disabilities, physical disabilities. I mean, um, and it has been I suppose, an uphill battle for many of the people with disability organizations to get public buildings or signposts or public websites to cater to people that are blind or are hard of hearing sometimes, or have physical disabilities. Is this so? I mean, um, if you design for people, um, I guess it's very helpful to be reminded that people are not uniform, that they are different, that they have different needs, and that they are even from the old joke of Monty Python, that they're all individuals except a few of them. Then essentially that they are unique more than they're necessarily uniform. Are we just continuously then forgetting that we have to design for difference?
Um, yes, I think that that's the ultimate temptation that we have to withstand, and at the same time, um, I think one of the certainly in the field of care and one of the pitfalls um, remain people designers who uh, who are who think that for instance, they have a parent with dementia or an aging parent, and they think, "Wow, I have this idea, and this is going to help them." And this idea may be very good. I mean, yeah. Um, but then then they assume that everybody has this a similar very sort of problem, and this is going to be the solution for large groups of people. So the designing starts, and at some point they're really pleased with what's been reached. But if they start testing them, is that in the end nobody's going to use them.
Mm.
Um, so there's a lot of enthusiasm and sort of sympathy, um, but it's also thinking for the other. It's not
Mm.
thinking and feeling with the other. So and it's with very good intentions. I mean these are not sort of the big tech boys, but they. I mean it's yeah.
But and then your key advice, I suppose, to these well-intentioned people is simply that carry on because the even though it's a messy process, the outcome is worth it in the end.
Yeah, but start from day one. Start and discuss it with the people that you're designing things for. I mean
With,
that's
and with that in mind, the earlier you start involving users, the better.
yes.
Hmm. Is um, especially in the Got-IT project, most of the digital developers, not all, but most of the digital developers are commercial enterprises somehow. They are building a product to be sold in a commercial marketplace. And while you can, of course, have cases like in Germany that has digital products being assessed and then um, being given granted status as an official treatment for reimbursement. Still, it's a product in the same way that a drug is a product. Um, but if you want early user involvement, clearly you need commercial actors to have as early an access to users to allow them to build better products. How can we sort of balance that? I mean, traditionally you would have a lot of reservations about having commercial enterprises directly interacting with citizens that would have uh, well, the right to privacy, right to a lot of other stuff. But in this case, if we want, well, quality, we have to find a balance that would allow these commercial enterprises to work with people as early as possible. Um, how have you sort of given that some thought about how to build that better balance? Is it because we need more governance, more structure, more experience, more
Um,
legislation, maybe?
yeah, I think it would be good if designers and enterprises realize that I mean that's the key to success. If they do it with the end user that they aim for,
Hmm.
uh, and that they should take them seriously.
Hmm.
And that also involves, for instance, um, paying them.
Paying
Like
the hmm?
paying the people that you co-create with. And I mean, you can discuss from how large, how much, and all that. But if you're a commercial enterprise, then you should take these people seriously. It's their time, it's their expertise that you're
Hmm.
asking. I mean, it's similar
You
in,
wouldn't.
in, in doing research. Then sort of it's also more common sense nowadays that you should give
Hmm.
your participants some sort of reward or
Hmm.
rewarding.
But isn't that when we talk about drug development a big no-no? I mean, paying people to test stuff? Is it different because it's not invasive or?
This is, yeah, so this is not drugs. It's hopefully not invasive, but that's something that you should really consider. Um,
Hmm.
because in emotional sense, it can be invasive, of course.
Hmm. Indeed, it could. Well, in a way, maybe even it should. Um, if it doesn't actually, well, affect people, what's the point?
It should
In
do
many ways.
something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sometimes. Um, So a model of trusted interaction. I know that last week we had Andreas Damm in the Got It talks, and he actually mentioned the element about quality, and especially involving the users early on had for him been a key to business success because that. As he said, it's not the guarantee not to fail, but he used to fail more.
Mm.
So in this case, of course, it added some very huge benefits for him as a business that he went through the messy process because it got him out of trouble instead and steered away from the biggest problems. Um, so if that is then um, are you then seeing even though you hope for more co-creation, are you also seeing that in practice? Are you are you observing that a lot of people are actually starting to do what you dreamed that they would do?
Um, I'm not sure. Yeah,
Hmm.
I just don't know that.
Hmm. Okay.
I think
But
it's for instance now there's a large program, Jane, sort of the
hmm,
Joint Assistive Technology, and it's focusing on dementia. And of
hmm,
course, then if in such a large program with a lot of publicity and people have they are designers are being and enterprises are being facilitated with consultation, then I think then there's definitely an inspiration to a motivation to really work with your end user.
hmm,
um, so I think it's then I assume that it must be getting better.
hmm. All right. So there's hope on the horizon there. Um, what would you then, as you say, you don't know, but you're hopeful and you're assuming. If you had a wish in terms of, well, either a legal requirement for an assessment or maybe a research pool to dive into, what would you really like to see in terms of ensuring that I mean as part of the Got It project, obviously the ultimate and utter success of the new Got It guideline, that's for sure. But if we leave that aside for a moment, what would you be hoping for? You would see as a Christmas gift for
Right.
digital development?
That it Yeah, I suppose that the technology promise actually becomes true, that it becomes reality, that it's but yeah, in a sense that's almost like wishing for world peace and all that. But I think it's really if it really makes it all these promises true, because we're going to need it with our graying population. We're going to really need it.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And so if you do all this technology, do it well, and don't waste any time. Just do it with use this expertise of people themselves.
that's a great way to end the Got It Talks this week. Thank you very much, Caroline. And we look forward to, well, co-creating and creating better quality in the future.
Yes, be fun. Thanks very much.